ChatGPT said. The next morning began with a gentle hush. The sky was pale pink, and a light breeze rustled the leaves. Sarah stretched in bed and listened to John's steady breathing beside her. She smiled, thinking of yesterday's fair and how the whole neighborhood had come together. She slipped out of bed and opened the curtains. A few early birds wandered down the sidewalk, coffee cups in hand, greeting each other with soft hellos. Sarah dressed in comfortable clothes and tied her hair back. She headed downstairs, drawn by the smell of fresh toast. John stood at the counter buttering bread and humming. He turned when he saw her. "Good morning," he said, offering her a plate. Sarah's heart warmed at the sight of him. They ate together in companionable silence, savoring the warmth of home. After breakfast, Sarah suggested they take a walk to visit the river where they had gone on her first day back. John agreed, grabbing 2 water bottles. They locked the front door and strolled down the block. Early sunlight danced on the pavement. Neighbors nodded and waved as they passed. Their steps fell into an easy rhythm. By the riverside, they sat. On the same smooth stones they had found days before, water lapped gently at the edge, and birds called overhead. Sarah let her feet hover above the cool water. John sat close and they watched the ripples. Sarah thought about how much had changed since she returned, how a simple water's edge could feel like a sacred place, full of peace. "I feel like I can breathe again," she said softly. John wrapped an arm around her. "Be home," he agreed. They sat in comfortable quiet, watching a family of ducks paddle by. After a while, Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was the certificate from the fair, now laminated on a keychain. She held it up. "I love this," she said. "Every time I see it, I remember how kind everyone was." She handed it to John to tuck into his pocket. Together they began their walk back. At the end of the block, they spotted Mrs. Patel tending her garden. The roses and marigolds were in full bloom. Mrs. Patel looked up and beamed at them. "Good morning, Sarah. John," she called. She handed Sarah a small pot with a young rose. "For your garden. From my garden." Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. She cradled the pot as if it were precious. Mrs. Patel patted her arm and returned to her flowers. John squeezed Sarah's hand and gave her a playful grin. "Looks like your garden is getting bigger," Sarah laughed, feeling the joy of community. They continued home, planting the little rose in a bed near the porch steps.
Ice.
Sarah patted the soil and watered it gently. Now knelt beside her and pressed the earth around the roots. "There," he said. "Welcome to your new home." Sarah stood and brushed dirt from her jeans. She looked at the rose, its tiny petals bright in the sun. It felt like a promise of growth. Later, they gathered the duffel bag from the closet and decided to donate some of Sarah's extra ship gear to the community center. They chose a few spare blankets, a flashlight, and some folding chairs that no longer fitted in Sarah's storage box. They loaded everything into the car and drove to the center. Inside, Mrs. Ramirez greeted them with a warm hug. "What brings you here?" she asked. Sarah explained the donation. "We want others to benefit from things I no longer need. You can use them for things like the night food drive or outdoor movie nights." Mrs. Ramirez's eyes glowed. "That's wonderful. Thank you, Sarah." She guided them to the storage room where John and Sarah neatly stacked the items. As they worked, volunteers passed by and offered thanks. Sarah felt the same warm glow of belonging she had felt at the fair. After they finished, John suggested they pick up lunch from the deli on Main Street. Sarah agreed. They walked through the center, greeting neighbors who recognized Sarah's uniform t-shirt and waved. Elmwood felt like a small town where everyone cared for each other. At the deli, they ordered sandwiches and iced tea. John teased Sarah about eating cold tea on a warm day, and she laughed. They sat at a picnic table outside, shadows from the awning making a cool place to eat. As they ate, Sarah told John about her plans to volunteer at the summer school reading program. She loved to read aloud and thought children would enjoy hearing stories of her travels. John nodded, encouraging her. "You'll be great at that," he said, and she believed him. On the way back home, Sarah spotted Karen Mills sweeping her porch. Karen paused and looked up. Sarah pulled the car over gently. John parked behind her. Sarah left the car and walked to Karen's steps. Clutched in her hand was a small stack of envelopes. "Hi, Karen," Sarah said, her voice friendly. Karen straightened and tucked her clipboard under one arm. "Good afternoon, Sarah," she replied. Sarah smiled. "I wanted to say thank you again for yesterday. It meant a lot." She extended the envelopes. "I baked some cookies and wrote little thank you notes for everyone who helped with the fair. Would you mind delivering them to the volunteers? I have Mrs. Patel, Mr. Alvarez, Mr. Davis, and you, of course," Sarah offered. Karen looked. Surprised, she took the envelope slowly. "That's very thoughtful." She glanced at the porch where her potted flowers glowed. "Thank you," Sarah nodded. "I thought it would help me show my gratitude." She turned to head back to the car, then paused. "I'm glad we're neighbors." Karen hesitated, then offered a small smile. "Me too," she said softly. Sarah returned to the car and they drove home. John leaned over and whispered, "You're amazing." Sarah smiled and shook her head. "I just want everyone to know how thankful I am." That evening, John set up a small lantern on the porch. Sarah carried a mug of hot cocoa and sat beside him on the swing. The sky was deep blue and stars began to shine. She sipped slowly, savoring the quiet. John wrapped a blanket around both of them. They talked about simple things, plans for the weekend, a movie to watch, dinner guests to invite. Sarah felt content, her heart steady and full. They listened to the distant sounds of the neighborhood, the soft laughter of children playing tag, the hum of a lawnmower finishing its day, the gentle bark of a dog calling its owner. As the night deepened, Sarah slipped her head onto John's shoulder. She felt safe and loved. She thought of the ship's deck under a starlit sky and realized she preferred this sky of home. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. "Thank you for coming home," John murmured. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at him. "Thank you for waiting for me," she replied. He kissed her forehead, and she smiled against his chest. All the small troubles, misunderstandings, phone calls, strict rules felt distant now. What mattered was this: a life shared, a community, healed, and a love that guided her safely through every storm. The porch light glowed softly, and the rose they had planted earlier caught the glow, its petals soft in the night. Sarah lifted her hand and touched one petal gently. She whispered good night to the rose and to the world around her. In that peaceful moment, she knew she had come home for good. Home was not just a place. It was people, kindness, and memories grown together like roots in the ground. And as long as she and John walked this neighborhood side by side, their roots would only grow deeper, and their story would continue, one gentle day at a time. John and Sarah stepped into the community center with smiles, determined to make the best of their day despite the morning's tense moment. The lobby was bright, with colorful banners announcing the summer fair and tables set up for sign-ups. Sarah spotted a long table where Mrs. Ramirez greeted volunteers. She wore an apron splashed with paint and looked up when they approached. "Welcome back, Sarah," Mrs. Ramirez said, giving her a warm hug. "We've heard you're home. Thank you for coming to help." Sarah returned the hug and laughed softly. "Thank you. I'm happy to be here." She glanced at John, who offered an encouraging nod. Mrs. Ramirez handed Sarah a list of tasks: setting up game booths, hanging decorations, and arranging tables for the bake sale. Sarah scanned the list, then turned back. "Where should I start?" Mrs. Ramirez pointed across the room. "You need streamers over by the basketball court and lanterns in the dining hall. Could you handle that?" "Absolutely," Sarah said. She folded the list and tucked it into her pocket. John joined her, carrying a box of lanterns. Together, they wove through the center, finding the long hallway that led to the dining hall. The walls were pale green and lined with windows that let in afternoon light. Sarah climbed a small ladder and began to string lanterns from the ceiling rafters. John handed them to her, one by one. They worked side by side, slipping into an easy rhythm. As Sarah tied a lantern, she imagined how magical the hall would look in the evening glow. Paper streamers draped between the light fixtures would dance in any soft breeze. She smiled at the thought. John leaned his head back and admired her steady hands. "Perfect," he said when she tied the last knot. Sarah climbed down and brushed dust from her jeans. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done it so neatly without you." John laughed, shaking his head. "We make a great team," he replied. They moved on to the next task. Streamers by the court. Outside, the sun shone brighter, and children squealed as they practiced shooting hoops. Sarah unrolled bright red and blue paper streamers and called over a trio of kids to help. Their eyes lit up at the chance to assist. They twisted the streamers around the court fence, giggling as the paper snagged on corners. Sarah showed them how to tie knots, and soon the court looked festive, with swaths of color fluttering in the breeze. A few neighbors wandered by, pausing to admire the work. Mr. Davis, their elderly neighbor, leaned on his cane and smiled. "This is wonderful," he said. "Thank you for doing all this." Sarah waved and thanked him. She felt a warm glow from the compliments. By late afternoon, most of the decorations were up. Chairs were neatly arranged around tables, games were set on benches, and a banner reading "Summer Fun Fair" stretched across the entrance. Sarah and John stood back and surveyed their work. The hall and court looked cheerful and inviting. John draped an arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Looks great, doesn't it?" he asked. "It really does," Sarah replied. She leaned into his side. "I'm glad we did this." Just then, Mrs. Ramirez approached with 2 bottles of water. She handed one to Sarah and one to John. "You two have been amazing," she said. "Thank you for all your hard work." Sarah took a long drink and wiped her forehead with her sleeve. "It was fun," she said, smiling. Later, as the center quieted, volunteers gathered for a quick meeting. They sat in folding chairs in a semicircle. Mrs. Ramirez stood at the front, clipboard in hand. She began to thank each person by name. When she reached Sarah, she paused and smiled warmly. "Sarah, we want to honor you at tonight's fair opening," she said. "Your service means a lot to our community. We'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation." Sarah's eyes widened. She placed a hand over her heart. "Oh, Mrs. Ramirez, that's not necessary." She hesitated. "I was just here to help." Mrs. Ramirez shook her head. "You deserve it. You left your ship to protect others, and now you're here making our fair bright. We want everyone to know how grateful we are." John beamed with pride. Sarah felt a flush of warmth. She felt proud, but also humbled. She glanced at the others in the circle, neighbors she'd waved to but not spoken with much. Their eyes shone with kindness. In that moment, she felt truly surrounded by friends. After the meeting, John suggested they take a break outside. They stepped into the late afternoon heat and walked to a shady bench beneath an oak tree. Sarah leaned back and closed her eyes. The steady breeze soothed her. John handed her a granola bar. She bit into it and sighed in contentment. "You for supporting me," she said, looking at him. "I don't know what I'd do without you." John took her hand. "You're the strongest person I know," he said softly. "I'm here for you always." There, smiled through tears. "I love you," she whispered. He squeezed her hand. "I love you too." They sat in quiet comfort for a while, watching volunteers finish last-minute tasks and families arrive to help set up tables of baked goods. The air filled with the smell of fresh bread and sweet pastries. Sarah felt a hunger for home after months at sea. She thought of her favorite chocolate cake recipe and made a plan to bake one for the next fair. As the sun dipped lower, the first guests began to arrive. Children ran through the colorful streamers, parents chatted, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. Mrs. Ramirez greeted a small crowd by the entrance, handing out programs. Sarah and John walked through the court first, marveling at how happy everyone looked. Just then, Sarah noticed Karen Mills standing near the bake sale table. Karen wore a neat blouse and slacks and held her clipboard. She watched the scene with a serious expression. Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. Would Karen try to spoil the event, or find another rule to enforce? Sarah gripped John's hand. John sensed her tension and nudged her gently. "Go say hello," he encouraged. Sarah took a breath and let go of his hand. She approached Karen. With a calm smile, Karen lifted her gaze, surprised to see Sarah. "Good evening, Karen," Sarah said. Her voice was steady. "Hope you're enjoying the decorations." Karen looked down at her clipboard, then back up. She cleared her throat. "They look fine." Her tone was neutral. Sarah nodded. "Would you like to help distribute these programs?" Sarah offered, holding out a stack. Karen stared for a moment, then accepted one. "Very well," she said quietly, letting her go down the line. She paused at the table of miniature pies and waved to Mrs. Patel and Mr. Alvarez, who smiled and waved back. As Sarah moved on, she heard Karen's voice behind her. "I want to apologize," Karen said. Sarah turned to face her. Karen's eyes were softer than before. "For earlier today with the call to the police, I didn't know you were military. I should have spoken to you first." Sarah's heart fluttered. She nodded. "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that." She paused. "I know you care about the neighborhood. I do too." Karen glanced at the crowd. "This fair, you did, eh?" "Lot of work for it," she hesitated. "Thank you." Sarah smiled warmly. "You're welcome." She turned to head back to John, but paused. "Would you like the certificate presentation to be here? By the banner?" she asked. Karen looked surprised, but then nodded. "Yes, I think that's fitting." Sarah walked back to John, relief and happiness blooming inside her. She squeezed his hand, smiled, and guided her to Mrs. Ramirez, who had the certificate ready. Mrs. Ramirez cleared her throat and tapped the microphone. "May I have your attention, please?" she called. The crowd quieted, and the lights from the lanterns cast a festive glow. "Tonight we honor a special person. Sarah Johnson, a proud member of the Navy. She returned from deployment just this week, and she jumped right into helping our community. I want to thank her for her service and for her hard work today." Cheers rose from the crowd. Sarah stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Mrs. Patel and Mr. Alvarez joined Mrs. Ramirez, who handed Sarah the certificate in a simple frame. The wooden frame held a printed note, "With deepest gratitude for your service and dedication. Elmwood Community Center, July 2025. John wrapped an arm around Sarah's shoulders as applause filled the air. Sarah felt overwhelmed in a good way. She caught Karen's eye in the crowd. Karen offered a small, sincere smile and a nod. Sarah returned the gesture. After the presentation, neighbors came forward to congratulate her. Some handed small gifts: a knitted scarf, a batch of cookies, a card signed by many. Sarah thanked each person, her voice warm and full of gratitude. John stood by her side, beaming. As the fair began in earnest games, food, and laughter, Sarah looked around, feeling at home in a way she hadn't since her return. She thought of the stormy nights at sea, the endless horizon, and felt grateful for solid ground beneath her feet and kind faces around her. Hours later, as the fair wound down and volunteers cleaned up, Sarah and John walked hand in hand back toward home. The sky was a deep blue, and the streetlights glowed softly. They turned onto their block and saw Karen tending to a small flower bed by her porch. Karen looked up and watched them approach. Sarah slowed as they passed. "Thank you again for today," she said. Karen nodded. "I'm sorry for making things hard before. Hope we can be good neighbors." Sarah smiled. "We already are." She paused, then added, "Have a good night." She and John continued on, the hum of good memories filling their hearts. Behind them, Karen returned to her flowers. She paused, touched a petal, and smiled softly. Elmwood was a little brighter now, and perhaps so was Karen's heart. ChatGPT said. Sarah woke early the next morning, her body still full of the relaxed comfort she felt since coming home. She slipped into jeans and a soft t-shirt that bore the emblem of the USS Truman. The sun filtered through the kitchen window as she poured herself a glass of iced tea. John sat at the table, scrolling through news on his tablet. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, sailor," he said, using the playful nickname he had given her in boot camp. Sarah laughed and set the tea down. "Good morning," she replied. She poured a cup of coffee for John and took a seat. They sat side by side, sipping in silence for a moment. Outside, birds chirped and the air smelled of fresh grass. After breakfast, Sarah decided to tackle a small project indoors. She had stored some of her uniforms in a box by the garage, and she wanted to organize them. She walked out to the garage, where her duffel bag and uniform box rested near the wall. The morning light slanted through the window, making dust motes dance in the air. She knelt and opened the box, carefully unfolding each uniform and hanging it on the portable rack. She lifted her dress blues and smoothed a crease with her hand. She thought of the ceremonies she had attended, standing tall in that uniform. She took a deep breath, feeling pride and gratitude. She moved to the next shelf and reached for her workout gear. Inside the house, John began some yard work. He pushed the mower over the lawn, leaving neat stripes behind. The hum of the engine mixed with the bird song. Sarah peeked her head out of the garage and watched him. He waved and gave her a thumbs up. She smiled and returned to the uniforms. Noon, Sarah packed her sailor's hat and placed it on a hook by the door. She thought she might drop by the community center to sign up for the summer fair volunteers. She had heard they needed help with decorations and games for kids. It would be good to be part of something, to share her skills and make friends. She grabbed her purse and stepped outside. The sun was warm on her skin. She closed the garage door and paused, across the street. Karen Mills tightened the fence gate on her property and glanced toward Sarah. Sarah offered a friendly wave, but Karen only nodded once and turned away. Sarah felt the familiar prickle of discomfort, but she pushed it aside and walked down the driveway. As Sarah reached the end of her yard, she noticed her duffel bag on the driveway. She had forgotten to bring it to the garage after organizing her uniforms. The bag lay against the side of the house, its straps folded neatly on top. She turned to pick it up, lifted it onto her shoulder, and started toward her car. Unbeknownst to Sarah, Karen watched her from behind the fence. The bag looked large, bulky. Its dark green canvas and straps gave it the look of military gear. In Karen's mind, something suspicious. Karen frowned and stepped forward, then quickly retreated behind the fence, reaching for her phone. Sarah reached her car, a navy blue sedan. She set the duffel bag on the hood to open the trunk. As she lifted the lid, she heard a faint click, one she had heard many times on the ship when securing hatches. She balanced the bag carefully and opened the trunk, placing the bag inside. She closed the lid with a soft thud. Karen raised her phone and dialed 911. She spoke quickly, her voice low but urgent. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person. They're unloading a large bag into a vehicle. I live at 142 Elm Street. Please send someone right away." She paused, listening. "Yes, I'm sure. They don't live here. Please hurry." Then she hung up. By the time Sarah finished securing her bag, she heard the distant wail of sirens. She stepped back and watched. 2 police cars turn onto her street, lights flashing but no sirens, now just bright blue and red lights dancing against the asphalt. She frowned, surprised and confused. John came out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag, saw the lights in Sarah's worried face. "What happened?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she said. "I was just about to go to the community center and then I heard police." She motioned to the cars slowing in front of their driveway. The first officer stepped out, his hand on his radio. Second officer followed, scanning the yard. They walked toward Sarah and John. Sarah lifted her hand in greeting. "Good afternoon," she said. "Is there a problem?" The lead officer spoke politely, but with firm authority. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious person unloading possible stolen goods into a vehicle. We need to ask you a few questions." Sarah's heart pounded. She glanced at John. He took her hand. She smiled, trying to stay calm. "I'm Sarah Johnson. I just returned from deployment on the USS Truman. These are my uniforms and my personal bag." She nodded toward the duffel in the car. "I was just moving my gear back inside." The officer looked at the car, then back at her. "Deployment? You're in the service." Sarah nodded. She lifted her shirt hem slightly to show the patch peeking out. "Yes, Navy. I'm home on leave." The officer softened and glanced at his partner. "I'm sorry. We'll let the dispatcher know. You can go about your day." "Thank you," Sarah said, relief flooding her voice. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The officers walked back to their cars. Before climbing in, the lights went off, and they drove away, leaving only a fading echo of the sirens. John exhaled and pulled Sarah into a hug. She rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I know how much you hate fuss." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. Should have brought the bag inside sooner." She leaned back and looked down the street. The neighborhood was quiet again. Kids still played on lawns, unaware of what had happened moments earlier. Just then, Mrs. Patel strolled by with her dog. She paused when she saw Sarah and John. "Are you both all right?" she asked. "I saw the police." Sarah smiled and waved. "We're fine. It's just a misunderstanding." She pointed to her uniform patch. "I'm Navy." Mrs. Patel's eyes widened. "Oh my goodness. You're so proud of you." She stepped forward and hugged Sarah. Sarah laughed softly, returning the hug. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Patel patted Sarah's arm. "Bring you cookies later?" She waved at John and walked on. Sarah turned to John. "They heard suspicious bag and assumed the worst," she said. John squeezed her hand. "A tough welcome home, huh?" Sarah nodded, folding her arms around herself. She glanced toward Karen's house. The blinds were down, but Sarah could almost feel Karen watching. A knot of frustration formed in her chest. "Do you think she called them?" John asked quietly. Sarah looked at him. "I think so." She pressed her lips together. Maybe she just wanted to protect the neighborhood. John put an arm around her shoulders. "Let's not let it spoil your day. Want to go to the community center?" Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." She lifted her chin and opened the car door. As she settled into the driver's seat, neighbors waved and shouted greetings from their lawns. Sarah waved back, determined not to let one wrong phone call define her return. She started the engine, and the car purred to life. To the community center, Sarah thought about what had happened. She felt proud of her service, sad that Karen hadn't recognized it, and hopeful that once the truth was known, the neighborhood would stand with her. She looked at John, who gave her an encouraging smile. "I'm with you," he said. Sarah smiled back. "Let's go volunteer." And with that, she drove on, ready to face the day and whatever Karen might do next with courage and grace. John and Sarah woke up to the gentle hum of morning in their neighborhood. The sun shone through the curtains, casting warm stripes across the bedroom floor. Sarah stretched, feeling the softness of her own bed beneath her. It had been months since she'd slept on something so comfortable. She rolled over and saw John still asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She smiled and kissed his shoulder. They dressed in casual clothes, Sarah in a light blouse and jeans, John in a polo shirt and short sand headed downstairs. The kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread. John poured 2 mugs of coffee and set them on the table. Sarah carried over a plate of scrambled eggs and fresh fruit. They sat together, sipping and eating, sharing quiet smiles. No alarms, no schedules, just peace. After breakfast, they stepped outside to water the flower beds. Sarah knelt by the roses and dripped water at their base. The petals glowed red in the sunlight. She stroked a leaf gently. John held the hose and laughed when water misted his face. She flicked the hose at him, and droplets danced in the air. He danced away, both of them laughing like children. For a moment, the stress of her time away faded entirely. Later, Sarah decided to wash her car, sat in the driveway, dusty from her trip from the base. She filled a bucket with soapy water and dipped a sponge in. She scrubbed the hood, rinsed it, and moved to the doors. The water ran clear, and the car gleamed. John joined her, drying it with a soft cloth. Neighbors waved as they passed by. Sarah waved back, feeling friendly and open. As she climbed back inside her car to adjust the mirror, she noticed a small sign at the end of the driveway. It read, "Reserved for military personnel." She smiled. It was a gift from the neighborhood in her absence. She thought of decorating it with little lights for the 4th of July. John walked over to admire her work. He draped an arm around her shoulders and said, "I'm proud of you." That afternoon, they visited a few friends down the street. They dropped off a loaf of bread at Mrs. Lee's house and enjoyed a quick chat on her porch. Mrs. Lee asked about life at sea, and Sarah talked about the sunrise over the waves. Then they stopped by Mr. Patel's house to pick up a photo album he had scanned. The album held pictures of their wedding and early months of Sarah's training. She promised to share the digital copies soon. By early evening, the Johnsons returned home. John unlocked the front door, and Sarah stepped inside, carrying the photo album. The living room was neat, the couch arranged just as she had left it. She set the album on the coffee table and sank into the cushions. John sat beside her and opened the album. They flipped through the pages, laughing at old hairstyles and awkward poses. Memories warmed the room, just as they closed the album. There was a knock at the door. Sarah looked up, curious. John opened the door to find Karen Mills, the HOA president, standing there with her clipboard. Karen wore a crisp dress and had her hair pulled back. Her expression was polite but firm. Sarah rose to greet her. "Good evening, Sarah." "Good evening, John," Karen said. Her voice was calm. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," John answered. "Please come in." Karen stepped onto the porch and motioned them to the driveway. Sarah followed, gentle and open. Karen pointed toward Sarah's car. "I noticed your car was parked partially over the sign. The HOA rules say the entire sign should be visible at all times." Sarah glanced at the sign, which was indeed slightly covered by the car's front bumper. "Oh, I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly. "I didn't see that. Must have angled the car wrong." She stepped forward and moved to adjust the car slightly. John helped guide her. When the car was straight, Karen nodded. "I appreciate you taking care of that so quickly." She paused, clipboard in hand. "Also, I wanted to remind you that trash bins should not be left by the curb after collection day. They need to be brought back by evening." Sarah blinked. "Of course, I will bring ours in right now." She fetched the bins from the street and wheeled them back to the garage entrance. John followed, shutting the garage door once they were inside. Karen watched for a moment, then spoke again. "I'm glad you're home, Sarah. Your service is valuable. I just want to keep our community neat and orderly." She offered a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you." "Karen," Sarah replied. She felt a slight chill at the edges of her welcome home joy. We nodded politely. "We understand." Karen turned and walked back toward her house. John opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "It's okay," she whispered. He breathed out slowly. Inside, they closed the garage door and leaned against it. John wrapped his arm around Sarah. "You handled that well," he said. She nodded but felt uneasy. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she replayed Karen's visit in her mind. She loved this neighborhood, these people except for this odd tension. With Karen, she wondered if Karen had always been strict, or if Sarah's absence had changed something. She stared at the ceiling, willing the unease to disappear. The next morning, Sarah set out early to grab the newspaper. She wore her uniform t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and slippers. She unlocked the front door and stepped outside. A fresh breeze carried the scent of coffee from John's study. She bent to pick up the paper, but as she did, Karen's voice called from across the street, "Sarah." "Wait." Karen came over, clipboard in hand again. Sarah stood and watched as Karen walked toward her. Neighbors peeked out from windows, curious. "I noticed your bins are still in the driveway," Karen said. "Collection was yesterday. They should be off the street by now." Sarah blinked. The bins had been brought in. She frowned and pointed to the garage. "They're inside," she said kindly. "I brought them in last night." Karen stepped forward and peered into the garage through the small window in the door. She shifted her posture, turning her shoulders. "Oh, I must have overlooked them. Thank you for keeping things tidy." Sarah forced a smile. "No problem." She turned to walk back inside, but Karen added, "Also, the reserve for military personnel sink. Could you move it a few inches so it doesn't block the view across the drive? It can interfere with anyone's line of sight." Sarah tilted her head. "Line of sight? I'm not sure I understand." She looked at the sign. It sat at the far left of the drive. Karen sighed lightly. "It's too close to the property." "Line. Some people have complained they can't see oncoming cars when they back out." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She tried to keep her voice gentle. I'll move it further to the right, she promised. I didn't realize it was an issue. Karen nodded firmly. Thank you. She turned and walked away, clipboard tapping against her side. Sarah watched until she reached her own driveway. Only then did she exhale. Inside, John met her in the kitchen. He handed her a glass of water. How did it go? He asked softly. Sarah shook her head. I don't know. It feels strange. He put an arm around her. Let's ignore it and enjoy today, he said. We have no reason to worry. Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's visits would continue. Later, they took a long walk around the neighborhood. Sarah held John's hand, and they talked about small dreams, painting the front door, planting a vegetable garden, having a barbecue for friends. But every few steps, Sarah glanced at the houses, half expecting to see Karen watching them. They returned home, Sarah set to moving the sign as promised. She lifted it and shuffled it to the right, closer to the garage wall. She hammered in the stake firmly. The sign now stood at a new angle, clearly visible, but no longer near the curb's edge. She stepped back to survey her work. It looked fine. She smiled and wiped sweat from her brow. That evening, as Sarah and John sat on the porch swing, the neighborhood glowed with porch lights and laughter. Kids rode bikes and friends walked dogs. Sarah leaned back, rested her head against John. Maybe it's better now, she said. He nodded. Just then, a neighbor strolled by and waved. Everything looks great, Sarah, he called. Sarah waved back. The calm of the night settled around them. Yet Sarah's thoughts drifted to the future. She had returned home to love and friendship, but a cloud of unease lingered. She hoped Karen's strict watch would end soon. For now, she would stay kind and polite, hoping the warmth she offered would eventually reach even the sternest heart. On the block, in the stillness, she closed her eyes and breathed deep. Home was a gift, even with its small tensions. Whatever came next, she would face it with patience and grace, just as she had faced the storms at sea. ChatGPT said, Sarah felt a rush of relief the moment she stepped down from the gangway of the USS Truman. The air smelled different from the sea salt and engine oil she'd grown used to. It was lighter, filled with the scent of freshly mown grass and blooming flowers. Her boots hit solid ground, and for the first time in 6 months, she could feel her whole body relax. She cradled her duffel bag against her hip and spotted a cluster of smiling faces waiting at the curb. John stood at the front of the group, his uniform crisp and pressed, though slightly rumpled from the early morning chill. His eyes were bright, and he held a small sign that read, Welcome home, Sarah, in bold red letters. Her heart swelled when she saw him. In that moment, she forgot every early wake-up call, every storm YC night, every moment of longing for home. She was back. As she walked down the ramp, John took 2 quick steps forward and swept her into his arms. He hugged her tight, pressing his cheek against the back of her neck, as though he could memorize her scent all over again. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself be held. The weight of months of duty lifted off her shoulders. Neighbors cheered, clapped, and waved small American flags. Children ran back and forth, giggling, eager to get a peek at the sailor who had braved the open ocean. Sarah felt a smile spread across her face as she pulled back just enough to look at John's eyes. They were glistening with pride and relief. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and said, I missed you so much. His voice was low, full of emotion she hadn't heard in months, over the crackle of radio static. She reached up and cupped his face with one hand. I missed you too, she answered softly. Behind them, neighbors offered congratulations and hugs. Mrs. Patel from next door handed Sarah a tray of cookies, wrapped in a bright ribbon. Mr. Alvarez from down the street lifted his granddaughter so she could give Sarah a pink rose. The children shyly lined up, each taking a moment to shake Sarah's hand or wave at her, as if she were a real-life hero in a storybook. Sarah knelt to meet their faces, thanked them, and promised to tell them about her ship and her adventures. When things had settled, that after photos and laughter, John suggested they head inside to unpack and warm up. The Johnson front porch was wide and painted a cheerful blue with potted plants arranged neatly along the railing. John opened the door, and the familiar creak of the threshold felt comforting. Sarah dragged her duffel bag in and set it down near the hallway table. John flicked on a lamp, and the soft glow filled the entryway. Everything in the house looked the same, yet different. The couch cushions were fluffed, family pictures hung straight on the wall, and the smell of vanilla cinnamon simmered from the slow cooker on the kitchen counter. Sarah's favorite soup, her mother's recipe, had been waiting all day. She took off her boots, kicked off her jacket, and ran a hand through her hair. John wrapped his arms around her again from behind. They moved to the kitchen table and sat side by side. John scooped 2 large bowls of soup and handed one to Sarah. She blew on it, then wrapped her hands around the warm bowl, savoring the heat. Each spoonful was like a taste of home-sweet carrots, tender potatoes, and just the right touch of spice. She closed her eyes and let the flavors remind her of family dinners and laughter. "Tell me everything," John said, watching her with patient excitement. Sarah nodded, took another spoonful, and began to share small moments first. She told him about the sunrise watches on deck, how the sky had turned pink and orange against the dark sea. She described the way the horizon looked endless, like a promise of new beginnings. John listened, nodding, asking questions about the sky's colors and the feel of the wind. As she spoke, Sarah noticed the way John's hand squeezed hers under the table. She felt grounded. It had been hard being apart. There were days on the ship when she had stood alone on the deck at night, looking at the stars, wishing for this moment, to sit here, across from John, sharing soup and stories. She went on to describe life below deck, how cramped the quarters sometimes felt, how the hum of the engines was constant, almost like a heartbeat of metal. She laughed, recalling jokes she and her shipmates had made about catching fish off the side of the ship during drills. John chuckled along, but his eyes softened as she spoke of tougher times. She mentioned missing holidays, birthdays, and how she had called home on a crackly phone line to wish her mother happy birthday. John reached out and touched her cheek. "I know it was hard," he said. She nodded, blinking back a sudden wave of emotion. "It was, but it taught me so much. I learned about my own strength." After a while, they finished the soup and moved to the living room. Neighbors filtered in for a small welcome-back gathering, coffee, cake, and more hugs. Sarah felt a warm glow as each person congratulated her, thanked her for her service, and welcomed her home. Some asked about the ship's catapult launch, others about the food on board. She answered patiently, happy to share. Through the laughter and chatter, Sarah spotted Karen Mills across the lawn. Karen was the HOA president, a stern woman with tightly curled hair and a gaze that always seemed to be judging. Today her arms were crossed over her chest, and she watched Sarah with a poised, almost cold expression. Sarah tried to catch Karen's eye and offered a small wave, but Karen only lowered her head and adjusted the HOA clipboard in her arms. Sarah felt a prickle of discomfort, but John squeezed her shoulder and mouthed, "Ignore her," in a playful whisper. As the sun climbed higher, the gathering inched toward its end. Neighbors said their goodbyes, promising to drop by again. Soon, Sarah helped clear plates, stack chairs, and wash a few dishes in the kitchen sink. The day felt like a dream, sunny, warm, and filled with friendly voices. Yet Sarah kept noticing Karen's quiet presence. 8. It was as if Karen was waiting for something to go wrong. Sarah shook the thought away. Perhaps Karen would warm up to her soon. Late afternoon found Sarah and John alone on the porch, sipping iced tea. The house was quiet now, filled only with the soft buzz of cicadas. Sarah leaned her head on John's shoulder and said, "I'm glad to be home." John turned and kissed her forehead. "Me too," he replied. He asked if she wanted to rest or go for a drive. Sarah thought of the winding roads along the river, the picnic spots, places they'd promised to visit once she returned. She smiled and said, "Let's go see the river." John rose and held out his hand. Sarah took it, and they walked down the steps together. The neighborhood was peaceful. Kids played in sprinklers, and a few dogs chased frisbees in yards. Karen Mills stood near her mailbox, clipboard in hand. She watched the couple stroll by, her expression unreadable. But as Sarah and John passed, Sarah offered another wave. Karen hesitated, then nodded once and slipped back inside her house. Sarah slowed and looked back, curiosity in her eyes. John put an arm around her shoulders and whispered, "She come around." Sarah nodded, though she wondered what else might happen in the days to come. For now, she focused on the gentle breeze and the soft glow of late afternoon. Made it through 6 months at sea. She was home at last, and nothing could take away the peace she felt right now. They reached the riverbank, where water lapped quietly against rocks. Sarah kicked off her shoes and let her feet feel the cool water. John sat beside her and they watched a pair of ducks swim by. The sky was clear, and the sun cast long, golden rays across the water. Sarah thought of her ship out at sea, so far away, and then of this moment simple, beautiful, and entirely her own. John turned to her and said softly, "Welcome home, sailor." Sarah laughed, a sound full of relief. She leaned forward to kiss him, feeling the warmth of home settle deep inside. In that moment, she knew she was exactly where she belonged.